And I want to start out a little bit about telling you about myself. I am originally from India, came here when I was about 8 years old, traveled quite a few states, grew up in Jersey, so I'm pretty much Jersey, and went to undergraduate there, did research, and this is where I feel this is my journey, is that it's a long road, but you start somewhere. And my stuff started out with volunteering in a hospital and knowing I wanted to be a doctor. So each one of you here knows what you want to do. So just remember, it's going to be your journey, and however it takes you. I am a family doctor by my original training. I went to medical school in New Jersey, and then did my residency in Charleston, South Carolina. After finishing my residency there, well, during my residency, I realized I really did not like the hospital or anything to do with keeping people in the hospital. So my passion became, well, what do I do to keep people out of the hospital? And I decided to learn about this field of preventive medicine. In preventive medicine, we have 3 subspecialties: aerospace, public health, and occupational and environmental medicine. Out of those fields, in order for me to go into that, I had to go get my master's in public health. And again, my journey was, God, I'm done. When am I going to start making the money, get out there and do the things? But maybe money is not the entirety, but it is my journey here. And I am very passionate and empowered to be here and blessed. We never know where our Spirit is going to have to carry us to get us to where we need to be. So after I finished my occupational medicine journey here, I still, again, was about prevention. And my passion also grew deeper. I lost my mom 2 years ago to a fancy disease called idiopathic pulmonary disease, which means we don't know what caused your lung disease. And she never was a smoker. She never ate red meat. She exercised. She did all the right things that you're supposed to do, and died of an illness, struggling to breathe. And had I known more about cannabis at that time, I think I could have made a difference. But I feel I'm making a difference now, and I thank you for this opportunity today. So on that note, my talk today is called Past, Present, and Future. Oops. Oops, let me just see here. Am I up and running? Do I have to hit F5? Is that what it is? There we go. All right. First of all, cannabis, the word cannabis, and bi means 2. So it is a stalk that has 2 sexes. That's what the word cannabis comes from. And this also, the origin of this word is Chinese, where ma also has the same meaning. So cannabis is one of the oldest crops that's been cultivated by man and woman. It originated in Central Asia. It has been cultivated, dispersed before written history. 2700 BC, the first written records were in China. And they also spoke about medicinal properties. So we talk about now that we need evidence. Well, we have evidence. We've had it for thousands of years. Now, there's like a lot of terms that we hear, and sometimes it's confusing. So I try to keep it simple. So when we talk about the plant itself, there's the stems that were used for rope and linen, and that is hemp. When we use the flowers and the seeds, and especially a resin on or within them contains the psychoactive chemicals, which is termed cannabinoids, marijuana, or cannabis. Now, when we talk about cannabis, there's actually 3 genuses of the plant: Cannabis sativa, indica, and rudalis. The 2 main ones that we really hear about in the news and what patients talk about is the sativa and the indicas. And just a brief overview about the sativa and the indicas is that we speak about the medical effects of these two. The sativas are more of the mind dominant versus the indicas are more of the body dominant. And I always used to get these confused. So the way I remember it is the indica, insomnia. So that's what it's more sedating, relaxing. It's a muscle relaxant. It treats acute pain, reduces nausea, increases appetite, increases dopamine. The sativa, on the other side, is more of a mind dominant. So it's the anti-anxiolytics, antidepressing, activates you. It's also uplifting, makes you feel better. It increases your alertness, increases energy, and enhances creativity. So when people talk about people that smoke and that they are just couch potatoes, that's not true. That's not true. It really depends on what combinations of the medication that they're using. Now, when we talk about cannabinoids, and a lot of people are starting to use this word, and it's great. There's a new vocabulary. So we are being heard, and people are starting to hear CBDs. I think lots of people now know what the word CBD today than they knew even a month ago or 6 months ago. When we talk about cannabinol, we call it CBN, cannabidiol, that's the famous CBDs, and THC is the tetrahydrocannabinol. THC is the only one with significant psychoactive properties. The CBNs have about 1/10 of the activities of THC, and the CBDs have no THC activity. So that's pretty much the three different segments that I would like to concentrate on. And that way, you will take away knowing when you hear these terminologies what they're talking about. Now, the psychoactive properties were first recorded in 2800 BC in China, and again in India, actually, where I'm originally from, where I'm proud to say, so I've been on this journey from my ancestors on. So 1500 BC was the earliest written reference to medical marijuana in the Chinese pharmacopoeia. In about 100 AD, the medical reference book stated that if seeds were taken in excess, it would produce hallucinations. The seeds were later mixed with wine to create an antiseptic that could be used during surgery. The early uses of these combinations were also used for rheumatic pain, constipation, malaria. I love this word, absent-mindedness. They knew back then. Menstrual cramps, and for also the analytic and euphoric properties. Then I'm going to move up a little bit in time. In 1595, the Spanish brought marijuana to the New World. The English introduced it in Jamestown in 1611, where it became the major commercial crop alongside of tobacco and was grown as a source of fiber. George Washington, our first president, his primary crop at Mount Vernon was cannabis. So it's been around in our history. Marijuana was listed in the Pharmacopoeia, which is our book that we use for medications, from 1850 to 1942. So this is not new to the United States at all, at all. We took it away when drug companies decided they wanted to make their money. So we're going to take it back. So it was prescribed for various conditions for labor pains, nausea, rheumatism. It's used as an intoxicant, also in common places between the 1850s to 1930s. So again, it was used also to feel good, and there's nothing wrong with feeling good. I don't understand what this country's fighting people for not feeling good. So this was one of the elixirs that was out there. Dr. Poppy's wonderful elixir with cannabis extract. I love what it says. A glass in morning will guarantee to relieve symptoms and leave pleasant feelings that last all day. That's all it took. And it says one of the bottle cures, it's for cough, it's for rheumatism, head tension, gout, shingles. It even treated shingles back then, and arthritis. So it was used for so many different things. And back then, doctors wrote a prescription. And I just want people to understand what the difference is. Right now, we as clinicians are not able to write a prescription for cannabis. I write an authorization, which is based on the criteria in the particular states for their medical conditions. But back then, they wrote a prescription on a prescription pad. And this was one of the other things, cannabis indica. And they would write instructions, how many drops, what we're doing now with tinctures, they were doing back in the 1850s. So the campaign conducted in 1930s by the US Federal Bureau of Narcotics, now the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs, sought to portray marijuana as a powerful, addicting substance that would lead users to narcotic addiction. So they had their purpose at that time. They were on their journey. And it is still considered a gateway drug by some authorities. In 1950s, it was an accessory of the Beat generation. In the 60s, it was used by college students and the hippies and became a symbol of rebellion against authority. And I think that's what we are still struggling with, that people still have that perception that if you use cannabis, you are a pothead and that you are a hippie and that that's your journey. They have still not recognized this to be a medicine. In 1964, THC, the main psychoactive component of cannabis, was first identified and synthesized. Dr. Raphael Melkunin, who's a professor of chemistry at the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, is the first to identify THC as the main psychoactive component of cannabis. And he also synthesized the THC. Now, this is 1964. As somebody had mentioned, Bill had mentioned that, what it took your journey in Colorado. Well, look at this. Here's science. 1964, we first find out about THC. The Controlled Substance Act gets introduced in 1970 and classifies marijuana along with heroin and LSD as a Schedule I drug. Everybody in this room know what a Schedule I drug is? Right, so it has no medicinal use, it has a high potential, and also they add the verbiage that they have no evidence. Well, number one, that's all being proven as a disclaimer, and we will talk a little bit about the addiction issues down the road a little bit. In 1970, while this Control Act was being established, NORML was also founded, okay? So NORML has been around since 1970. It's gonna be 44 years. And that's the year I came to this country. So as far as a brief history, we've seen from 1619 where we were told to grow hemp to where marijuana has been prohibited. And we could see the medicinal values, and in between 1928 to 1936, this is when this whole reefer madness, a lot of misconception had come out at that time too. So in 1973, we move along and we get the DEA formed. The DEA was actually a merger between the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs and the Office of Drug Abuse Enforcement. In '76, we first have our first case of Robert Randalls, who gets the medical necessity for glaucoma. '76, we have our first patient that is now being able to get it back. In '78, we start the federal government investigation on new drug compassionate use program and supplies patients with marijuana. In '78, we get our first law recognizing the value of medical marijuana. In 1980, now the drug companies are always trying to figure out, how do we get a piece of this? So now we get this Marinol that is a synthetic version of THC, and it's being tested also with cancer patients at this point. And Marinol was mainly created for the side effects of the chemotherapy agents, not as a treatment for chemotherapy, but to treat the side effects of it. In '85, Marinol became approved. And you could see, this is one of the issues that becomes when anytime you classify something as a drug, and cannabis is a drug. In order for a drug to get to the market, it has to go through trials, different levels of investigation, trial with animals, in vivo, in vitro, patient studies, and all of this takes money. And that's why our drugs cost as much as they do, because let's say you want to create it as a drug today, 2014, that patent might last only 7 years or 9 years, depending. And if it takes you 7 years to get it to the market, you only have 2 years to make your money. All of you remember when ibuprofen used to be only a prescription medication. 600 milligrams or 800 milligrams was only, and to this day, those dosages are only available through a prescription. Yet, if you go to your local store and you pick up ibuprofen, they come in 200 milligram tablets. 4 of those equate to 800 milligrams. But this is what happens in the system of changing things. So, in 1988, Judge Francis Young recommends marijuana to be placed in Schedule II. So there has been leaps where people have tried since '88. Now we're going 25 years that we still have not gotten it moved out of Schedule to back to Schedule II yet. So that's my thing. There's things on a federal level, on a medical issue that we definitely have to address, that we need to get this drug first out of Schedule I. December of 1988, the DEA administrator overrules and keeps it in Schedule I. And to me, the people that make these decisions are not medical people. They are legislators. The patients, to me, are the medical people. You people will have a better knowledge than the patients that have a legal piece of paper to write it on. In 1990, the scientists discovered this whole concept of a cannabinoid receptor, that there's these receptors that actually use cannabinoids to do their work. Miles Herklem, who's a senior investigator at the National Institute of Mental Health, and his research team discovered this receptor system, and this makes people understand how the pharmacological effects of cannabinoids, which occur in THC, work. So now it's starting to make sense to them. Oh, okay, you put a key into the door and it opens it. And that's how it works. And there's only certain keys that open certain locks. One key does not open every lock. So this concept is there. So in 1991 now, this is coming out, we find these receptors, and the federal government shuts down or suspends the compassionate use program. Now we're moving on. 92, we find the first cannabinoid within our own body. This is amazing, and this was done by Dr. McCullum's laboratory again in Israel. So remember I mentioned his name in '64. Here it took him from 1964 to '92. First he finds and creates the synthetic THC, but now he finds that there are these same type of cannabinoids which are produced within our own body, and they're everywhere. This discovery built to the receptor idea that there's ligands, and his lab then finds a second one. And these are the two that they found that are made within our own bodies that are working. And I'm going to mention the word endo cannabinoids, which means they're within our body, and outside ones that we put in, okay? When we talk about this is a system. This is not like, well, if you have a car, we take care of the tire or we take care of the steering wheel. This is the whole system together is what we're finding out. Led to that enzymes make up what is now called the endocannabinoid system. It seems to be most of all part of every part of our body. It's essential to life. The word essential means cannabis is essential to life. It will be the vitamin M of tomorrow. So when we look at the body, I love this picture because this is how complex we are. There's so many different parts of our system. There's the sensory system, there's the immune system, the cardiovascular system, the muscle system, our skeletal muscles, our reproductive system, our endocrine system, our excretory system, digestion, respiratory, all of these. So it's, when we go to doctors, they're just treating one piece of this system. They are not thinking about the whole system. So what we have learned, this system is what is there in our bodies to help us recover. This is what used to be able to manage our system. What has happened through time is that we have been bombarded between stress, what we are putting into our body or what we're not putting into our body, living day to day, having to cope, and this system got burnt out, could not cope anymore. And that's why we have learned this system was meant for us to relax, eat, rest, forget, and protect. The two words here that I really want you guys to remember is forget and protect. Certain things in life we need to forget. If you had to go to a morgue and see 100 people, you don't want to remember those 100 faces. If you have been in war and had to see people die and be blown up, if you've had to see other people shot and hurt or traumatized or yourself, that you want to forget. And the brain is beautiful because in most cases, we don't remember most of the painful things that we've experienced in life. And the other part is to protect our body, to help us cope. So this system was there, is there, within all of us. And this was written by him in '98. So what we're finding out now is about these receptors. And they are CB1 receptors and CB2 receptors. And actually we're finding out there's more receptors. And we're going to find out more and more and why cannabis works in so many ways for so many medical issues. And these receptors, the CB1 receptors, are primarily in the brain, but they're also in our liver, our kidneys, our pancreas, and various in our spleen. The CB2 receptors are primarily for our immune system. So I want to keep it as simple as that, so when you hear these words and you want to talk about it to somebody, you can say there's two receptors. One's primarily in the brain, one's in the immune system. Now, this is a graph that shows you the location. Now, everything that's lit in blue is receptors. They're everywhere, everywhere. Our skin, everywhere, our joints. The ones that are lit up in red will just tell you that they are more intense, and the yellow spots as well. So again, it's there. I want to keep repeating that to you. This is within your own body. There's different areas of the human body where the cannabinoid receptors exist from birth. So this is not something that you develop. You have it when you come into this world. These receptors attach to cannabinoid chemicals, and they exist in the cannabis plant. And once they attach, that's when they start working. Once these receptors are activated is when the healing occurs on a cellular level. Much research has been done, and we have found that it is working for many illnesses, and this is the key word, without side effects. Without side effects. Most of the Western medications, all in some form, have a side effect because they are metabolized. If you put it in through your mouth, it is either metabolized by the liver or the kidney. So those two organ systems are being affected in some way, i.e., Western medicine has side effects. I love this cartoon. You've got a person smoking a joint and then they're saying, keep that's dangerous drug. Meanwhile, you got a doctor out there popping out the Paxil, the Xanax, the Vicodin, the Vioxx, the Prozac, the Avandia, Celebrex, you name it. The average patient in this country is on at least 5 medications. They're on a blood pressure medicine, they're on a cholesterol medicine, they're on a diabetes medicine, they're on some type of a reflux medicine, and I call it the happy pill, either for anxiety or depression. And these are prescriptions that they're on. Never mind what they're taking over the counter, the NyQuils, the Advils, the Tylenols, anything else that they're adding to their party pack. So to understand this system of life exists within your body and your brain is to understand the remarkable and the various therapeutic applications of cannabis. Okay, I'm gonna read that again. To understand that this system of life exists within your body and brain is to understand the remarkable and various therapeutic applications of cannabis. So this system is everywhere. When we talk about having something to work, it is something happens, something connects, and you get a result. What's interesting about the cannabis system, it's kind of backwards, where instead of having things just being released from the presynaptic to the postsynaptic, it waits for something to come, and it says, I'm coming back to you. So, let me get a pointer here, and I'm gonna, okay, so this is the presynaptic portion, and this is the postsynaptic portion. So the cannabinoids are actually, that we've talked about, the two that are within our own body, actually are being released from the postsynaptic and get back in, and then that's the response. What we're finding out is those same cannabinoid receptors recognize THC, the CBDs, as the same. So what you're doing is saying, I know you don't have enough, so let me come and give you some more. And that's what the cannabis is doing to our body. It is giving us what we don't have enough of. And it works specifically for where it's needed, without the side effects. And as you can see, we talked about the THC, the CBDs, the CNN. And each of them, again, the simple concept, here's one receptor, here's another. The CB2 receptors modify the peripheral organs and are associated, again, as I mentioned, the immune system. The CB1s, they are in our brain, central nervous system, but also in other parts of the human body. And as you can see here, in the brain area, and you can see this is the liver, you've got it in your organ systems, you've got it throughout your joints, you've got it on your skin. So the THC and the CBNs are known as the fit and lock key. So that's what I want you to understand. This is something that is a key that fits into a lock, and it's specific. Oops. Okay, so how does the cannabis work? Now we mentioned again, I told you about the endocannabinoids, which are derived from our brain. The phytocannabinoids, which are from our plants, and then the synthetic. When we talk about the synthetic, Marinol is one that's here in the United States, but there's also a new one that has come out in Europe, Sativex, which is a spray that they're using for patients with MS. And hopefully it will be here, and it's going to be in drug studies, but it is also a synthetic form of THC. So the synthetic ones that are here in this country are the Marinol and the Drobanol. The problem with this is that the bioavailability, which means that when you take it in, what is really available to you, okay, is only about 10 to 20% when it's taken by mouth. The reason is because it is not very soluble, so it's not able to be mixed so that it can be taken through. It's also metabolized by the liver. And as I mentioned to you, when anything has to go that's taken through the mouth, it goes through metabolization through the liver or the kidneys. When it goes through the liver, again, there's a process. So again, there's damage in that area, and by the time it affects you, it could take from a half an hour to hours later. So it's not something that you say, I'm going to take this right now, as we do with cannabis, and say within 10 to 15 seconds, I will have what I need, the impact, and make me feel better. And again, the half-life of this is between a half an hour to 60 hours, which means if you took in 10 milligrams, maybe in a half an hour, you might have 5 or 60 hours, which is 3-4 days later, you might have 5 milligrams. So it varies, so there's no consistency with it. And it was prescribed mainly for nausea and vomiting associated with chemotherapy. The side effects were sedation, altered elation, and confusion, which we see, but again, not the same feeling and not the same impact that we have from cannabis. I'm trying to figure out how to get my pointer off. Okay. Now, the brain is an amazing part of our body where each part has a function. And again, remember these receptors that we keep talking about. They're in different places, so they're going to impact differently on where they attach. When we talk about the amygdala, there's different portions that we're talking about here. The neurocortex, the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the hippocampus, the brainstem, the cerebellum. Again, different parts function, and this is where the cannabis has different reactions for some people. So when we talk about the amygdala, we could see that it has this portion of emotions, fear, and anxiety. And I'm sure people have told you, sometimes people that take THC end up having panic attacks and paranoia. But not everybody experiences that. And some people don't experience it initially, but they can have episodes of it depending on the forms of the cannabis that they use. The basal ganglia, again, movement. So it affects your reaction time having THC on board. The brainstem, which is the biggest part when people have brain injuries with nausea effects. And this is one of the things I always like to talk about a little bit, is that when we see people with head concussions now, in fact, the NFL is talking about using cannabis because it helps with concussions, because this is one of the things that we're learning. It also, with patients that have had a head trauma, one of their first signs will be nausea, and which is telling the doctor or the clinic, or should be telling them, that something is happening in the brainstem. It's swelling, so this is a concern. The cerebellum is for balance, so sometimes people have coordination problems with THC. Memory information. Hypothalamus is for eating, sexual behavior, so again, increased appetite. Neurocortex is for thinking, feeling, and movement. So sometimes people have altered judgment, and sometimes that's a good thing with cannabis. We want them to stop concentrating on their pain or the events that keep bothering them and not being able to function. Motivation and reward, again, feeling good. This is one of the side effects that we have, or the effects that we get. In the spinal cord, we see the pain sensitivity, and this is where the huge part is. People say, I'm in chronic pain. When you use cannabis, it's not that you're not in chronic pain. The pain is not your first important part of your life controlling you. You can cope, which gives you hope. People are on these medications, and you mentioned even, Christina, you're on these narcotics. You're taking them, you can't function, it doesn't improve your quality of life. You're numb maybe at that point. And meanwhile, you've got constipation, the side effects, you can't function, you can't be independent. And these medications not only affect the individual, they affect the families, they affect your coworkers, they affect everything you can do. Now, what was interesting is that we started to understand, wow, if this works for this, maybe we should try it for that. And this is what the history that we're learning. People used it in the European times for menstrual cramps. I see a lot of patients now with hepatitis C that use it because of their nausea, their chronic problems, and they don't want the interferon, or they've had the interferon. It didn't do anything for them. So they're looking to the other option. HIV, the virus, irritable bowel syndrome. This is something huge that's coming about. It's not just irritable bowel syndrome, but also inflammatory bowel disease, which incorporates Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis. And this other part, GERD. Does everybody know what GERD is? Gastroesophageal reflux disease, heartburn. If you didn't have it, you're going to have it with most of these medications. And that's another medication that they have to treat you with now. And because they put you on an H2 blocker, the normal acid that you were supposed to have in your stomach is no longer there. So now you need an antibiotic. The antibiotic is going to create a yeast infection. So now you need another pill to put in your vagina or something else. This is just an on and on and ongoing problem. So my thing is, let's try to nip it in the butt and really treat the underlying problem and not the symptoms. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in detail about the other diseases. Just to mention a few here: epilepsy, seizures, spasticity, cancer, and I'm going to touch upon that as well. So we could see here, what we started to notice was the potential uses for marijuana. Multiple sclerosis, ALS, chronic pain, Tourette's. Tourette's is a syndrome that people want to function, and they function with a tic. They blurb out words, they have incoordinable actions, but they want to function, so this helps them. HIV patients, hypertension. Now, this is, again, I have patients that are off their blood pressure medications. Blood pressure medications have so many side effects. Sleep apnea, it's helping for. GI disorders, incontinence, rheumatic arthritis, skin infections, MRSA. People heard about this? It's called methicillin staph aureus. We used to treat staph infections. Staph is what's on your normal body. Now the medication that works doesn't work anymore. So now we've created another infection from trying to treat an infection. Superviruses, they're still coming out more and more. Osteoporosis, this is huge for the patients. For women and most people in our 30s, mid-30s to 40s, is when we get the most maximum amount of bone density. After that, it's all downhill. Men are protected a little longer because of your hormones and testosterone. Women, if you're heavier, you're getting protected, but who wants to be heavier when we're getting older? So pruritus. Pruritus is itching of the skin. People with psoriasis. I see patients with eczema that use cannabis topically, and it works. Diabetes. Diabetes. We have probably almost 60% of our country is obese. Not even overweight, obese. And we're talking about children now, 10 years old, that are diabetic. from obesity. Hepatitis C, I've mentioned, dystonia, which is muscle spasms, fibromyalgia. At least every one of you know at least one person in this room that has had fibromyalgia, I am sure. Is there? Most of you, I'm sure, at least knows one person. Alzheimer's, this is growing. We have elderly patients that are living longer with Alzheimer's. And anybody that's had a family member with Alzheimer's, you know how devastating that is. I have Alzheimer's patients that are functional, off their medications. So now we've learned, I've seen it used for patients that are using it for their migraines. It's stopping cancer. It is curing cancer. People are afraid to say this. Cannabis cures cancer. Cannabis can help prevent cancer. Cancer is a cell gone crazy. Stop making them go crazy. It relieves symptoms of chronic diseases. Alzheimer's, glaucoma. This is where it originally really made its big point, because of the first patient that got his cannabis use because of glaucoma. Glaucoma leads to blindness. If you're blind, you can't do a whole lot of being independent. You'll still need assistance. And here we are not only preventing it, we're keeping the glaucoma down to where they don't have glaucoma. Again, we are curing glaucoma in patients. This is maybe not across the board for everybody, but it is doing it for patients. We have seen how it works. Cannabis cures hepatitis. Hepatitis, any itis you hear, arthritis, osteoitis, bursitis. Itis just means inflammation of. Okay, so hepatitis is inflammation of the liver cells. And again, hepatitis was acquired in multiple ways. People get it from sexual contact, blood transfusions. People don't know how they got it. People got it when it was not just that they were using IV drug abuse, but people had gotten blood transfusions. And back then they didn't check all the blood. Years later, patients come in with non-specific symptoms where they're having nausea, muscle aches, fatigue, and not knowing, show up in a doctor's office, and finally somebody checks them. Because they're saying, well, I never used IV drugs. I never had this. And they've had some exposure, and there is really, on the outside world right now in the United States, there's no treatment for hepatitis C other than some of these interferons and other things that they're trying and keeping their viral load low. Cannabis prevents diabetes. So if you prevent it, you don't get the disease. If you don't get the disease, you don't get the complications. If you don't get the complications, you don't cost healthcare dollars. So this is not just point A, but it's going to impact this whole Obamacare, I think, as well. I see a lot of diabetic patients that, will say I'm diabetic, but then they have the peripheral neuropathy, the pain that they are unable to control, and there's nothing that they could do. And diabetes right now is not a medical criteria in all states, but the symptoms of the illness are. Now, this is huge to show that how one drug impacts the system again, the whole system to work together. It affects from the brain, from your digestive system, to the fat in your body. And the fat in your body controls so many things, whether you need energy or to store energy. It varies. And this is where cannabis is going to be used and is used not just for people to increase their appetite, but also to decrease their appetite. So it's not just everybody that uses cannabis has got the munchies. So that it helps in so many other ways as well. It affects the liver that needs to heal. It affects your muscles, so people are able to move. It affects every part of your system. When we talk about cannabinoids, we learn that the cannabis has something like over 60 to 80 different cannabinoids. We have still learning more and more, okay? This chart here kind of concentrates more on the non-psychotropic cannabinoids, so the CBDs, the big ones that we talk about. And there's lots of different charts out there. Try to get familiar with these. Educate yourself on the products you're using and see how it works for you, so then you can educate some other people. And you can see here as well, even though we've got the CBDs, oops, I'm gonna go to this chart because it's a little brighter and I can see better. The CBDs here, huge aspects. Antibacterial, cancer cell growth, inhibits it. Neuroprotective, promotes bone growth, reduces seizures and convulsions. And this is why it's made its name here in Georgia with younger children as well. It reduces blood sugar level, and this is how it's helping with diabetes. It helps our immune system. If you're able to fight off not getting sick, you don't have a complication. And that's huge for people that already have an immune problem. If you're diabetic and you catch a cold, or if you have COPD and you catch a cold, your immune system is not able to fight it off. But cannabis helps in that. Reduces inflammation, artery blockage. It's a vasodilator. It's helping people that have heart attacks. It helps people that have strokes. It helps people with bowel issues, small bowel contractures, people that have had surgeries, people that have been toxified by their medications from the side effects. Relieves pain, anxiety. It also helps muscle spasms, helps you calm down, treats psoriasis, and it's a vasorelaxant, so opens things up, gets blood flowing. If you look at some of the other ones, again, there's the CBGs, aids in sleep, CBGAs, again, inflammation. And you can see there's a lot of overlap. And this is why I have a concern with these legislative bills that are only going out for one segment. They're not understanding this whole process. They need to understand, it's not just one piece. You can have multiple impacts of it. And I still don't understand why they are so scared of THC. Don't get it yet. But we're gonna work on them. All right, so as far as cannabis, you can take it in 3 primary ways. You can ingest it, but remember with ingestion, it varies from person to person. You don't know the contents of the product that you're consuming. You don't know if the product is made the same way each time, and you don't know what went into the initial product. So that can vary in time. But they're also having sodas, people are drinking, people are making teas. So there's different variations and combinations. And when I talk to my patients and I counsel them, I'll say to them, there is no one cookie cutter for everybody. What works for Joe might not work for Mary. What works for Mary doesn't work for Tim. Or what works for Tim only in the daytime works for Mary at nighttime. It's just a combination. And so what I tell my patients to do is to journal. And I'll tell them, give yourself a journal, give yourself a scale of 0 to 5. Give your top 3 symptoms, if it's sleep, if it's joint mobility, if it's just having a quality of life that you feel good that day. Give yourself a scale and see which combinations work best for you. So smoked cannabis is either we are now using the vape pens, you're either taking it through a pipe, through a bong, through a joint. And also, the two things in between the smoking and the vaporization is just less irritant. But that whole thing needs to be befundled, because a lot of misconception there that smoking will create lung cancer. Well, the data proves absolutely the opposite. If you look at the general population, people that don't smoke at all and people that smoke cannabis have less cancers. Go figure. And we just talked about that it's preventive against cancer. When they looked at tobacco smokers that used cannabis, it's the tobacco smoke, the tobacco tar, that's creating the cancers. When you had cannabis, people that used only cannabis, you did not see the cancers. And as much as people say that, you know, smoking, I'll always put that in because I need to as a clinician, that it's an irritant. Anything that becomes an irritant has a potential of becoming carcinogenic, on that note as well. When people consume the smoking, though, it's a quick delivery system. It's not that they're waiting around to say, am I going to feel better? They're able to take 2 hits, 3 hits, whatever it may be, and within 15 seconds, 20 seconds, they get their impact. So they're not waiting, and it also works well for them. As far as, this is the range of where is very interesting. When somebody will say to me, the first time I used it, I had no impact. And this is where the receptors have to get evoked, okay? It's like seeing something for the first time, you might not recognize it. But after a while, even the smell of that object is going to make you know what that object is. The same way, the body needs time to recognize. And the first time, sometimes only 10% of the people actually get the impact. But heavy users get about 25%. So the toxicology of this whole beautiful product is that it's not toxic. It has a wide therapeutic range, and there is no direct deaths from cannabis. And I'm going to reiterate that again later. The fatal dose is unknown. There's been some animal studies that showed that maybe 4,000 to 40 times the highest recreation, you would be sleeping. And that's the other thing about cannabis. Alcohol, narcotics, opiates kill you through the respiratory system. They depress your respiratory system. Cannabis does not. Cannabis does not depress the respiratory system, and that is why nobody dies from a cannabis overdose. There's been some implications that it's involved with underlying heart disease and arrhythmias and heart attack. None of this is confirmed, and in fact, it's going the other way. This is a great cheat sheet. Has any of you seen these? How many of you have seen this one? It's great, and this is where I want you guys to get information. I want first for you guys to start with you being educated. Once you're educated, you can talk about it and teach it to other people. But this, I like this sheet, and let me blow it up a little bit here. And you can see that I'm very color coordinated. And I like to see things and see what is easy to understand. So you could see how one protects against cancer. And this again, if you look down here, you could see that there's more than one type. There's so many different forms that affect anti-inflammatory. So this is where we're saying that we still don't know where all the receptors are. This is why when cannabis is taken as a whole product, it works. You don't have to say pick and choose these things separately out of it. But this is out there, and if you guys have any questions, I am available at the end of this, and we will be here to talk. There are some amazing researchers that are out there doing work, and I really want to let you people, when you see their names, Dr. McAllister, Dr. Hergen, rather, Dr. Menelade, Dr. Guzman, Dr. Abraham, Dr. Berman. These are all people that have been preaching, have been trying to put the research out there. We're learning a lot about schizophrenia and cannabis. And what's interesting about this is that a lot of people in the beginning were saying cannabis made you crazy. We're finding out it's just the other way around. Cannabis keeps you sane. And this is just a picture that shows the orange lit up areas where in a schizophrenic patient it's much more lit up. And after the consumption of cannabis, it's much more lowered. And this came out from a Brazilian study, okay? And for years, the faculty argued that there was no reason for cannabis, but that's changing. This is changing everywhere. People are saying there is a cause and we need to do this. And the other study that was determined, and it counted psychosis as well in 2004. A study published last year found that cannabis CBD can improve cognitive function. I have dementia patients that are able to cope and have hope because their symptoms are controlled. A group of Brazilian researchers, Rafael, Quinn, and Fernando, they published in Frontiers investigating the different sorts of treatment that they're going to be looking at for cannabis and the cannabinoids. So it's happening. It's just going to take time. So this is the main properties of cannabis. If there's 4 properties that you want to understand and why it works, it's anti-proliferative so it protects cancer cells from reproducing. At the same time, it does not impact the healthy cells. Where we take antibiotics or agents, they don't just say, well, you got this bacteria, I'm only going after that. They just go, that's why broad spectrum antibiotics kill everything in the gut, and you have to replenish your gut bacteria, versus this is working specifically on the cancer cells. It's anti-angiogenic. You need blood supply for something to grow. This specifically goes and cuts off the blood supply for the cancer cells, thereby killing the cancer cell. It's anti-metastatic. We've all heard the word, they've got metastasis to the bone. They've had metastasis to their brain. Metastasis means spreading to another organ. Cannabis helps with that. It's apoptotic, which means induces the cancer cells to seek their own death. What that means is when a cell has lived its life, it's time to be put to sleep. And it knows to put those cells to sleep. And that's another beauty of it. Cannabis has helped in treating melanoma. So I've talked to you a little bit about the brain, which is inside of you, to something as superficial as what's on the outside of you. Melanoma is a skin cancer that's out there. And everybody, I tell them, please check your skin. Remember your ABCDs with melanoma. A, any mole that you see on your body that's asymmetrical. If you cut it down the middle, if it's unequal. B, if the borders of it are irregular. C, if there's a color change, if there's different pigments within that lesion. And D, the diameter starts to grow, okay? So here we see somebody that's treated with cannabis oils for melanoma. Okay, so cannabis in the news, we've been hearing about it. And as Sharon mentioned, you could hear people talking about it in all age groups. It's amazing, and I'm so proud of that people are not fearful. There is still a lot of fear. Fear. And that holds a lot of people back. So we've heard about this now. Cannabis plays a role in less use of opioid pains. I see this with my patients. I have patients that are off, OFF, all their narcotics. They only use cannabis. And this just came out actually on the 19th, so I was happy to see it's only taken them a while, but they're doing it. The potential for CBD to treat diseases that are well documented in the US government focused on federal patients on CBD over 10 years of age, yet the US classifies marijuana as Schedule I. Other countries are using this for their children, treating them, and we are still scared of it here. And they've said that there's no medical uses. This sentence should. This says families with sick kids are having to move to Colorado for marijuana. That's criminal. We've heard about Charlotte's Web in the news. This has been huge because it is, at least people have something to hold on to. So my thing is that we definitely want people to understand it's out there, it's getting into the news, and there's lots of potential use for this for epilepsy and seizures. Doctors and parents in Colorado, Israel are administering marijuana cannabis to their children, and it's working just like it would be for adults. I love this slide. Annual deaths. People die from tobacco, poor exercise, alcohol, prescription drugs, motor vehicle accidents, homicides, aspirin, peanuts. Marijuana, 0. Let me hear everybody say that. 0. So there is no deaths from cannabis. Right now, medical marijuana is legal for medical marijuana use in 20 states and the District of Columbia. This number is going to change, so there's 30 more that are out there. It varies from state to state as far as the criteria that they qualify you for and for the length of time. It is done in different states by different people. Some states can only do it with an MD. Some do it with a DO, osteopathic, an NP, a nurse practitioner, a PA, and also a naturopathic doctor. Put that in there. So it varies from state to state. Once they have a card, our patients are going in to a store. They're not at the side back road trying to find somebody, waiting for a hookup, and make sure that they don't get beat or get arrested by the police, or know what quality they're getting, or if they're even getting cannabis, or if it's laced with something else. So my thing to the legislators is, you're going to help people not be traumatized for getting a medicine and make it easier for them. One of the last things I want to talk about is PTSD. I was very hopeful to hear about this Arizona study that was going to be where they had passed part of it, but they got beaten down. And I read the comment that the representative had said that she was concerned that by using this for PTSD, they would want to get it legalized. And my comment was, and what so? I am going to be involved in a study, and we'll get more information. We're going to do our first 10,000 patient study to get a survey done. It's going to be done online. Anybody that's a vet, that has a diagnosis of PTSD, or lives in a state where cannabis is allowed, I would like them to please take part in the survey to let people know how it's working for them, okay? Finally, we have 2 states that have legalized marijuana, Washington and Colorado, and I came from Washington, and I'm happy to see other people here. NORML, I want to thank you folks, is a nonprofit public interest group that represents millions of Americans that use weed responsibly. I'd like to get that word changed to cannabis and lead the reform cannabis through laws of voters and legislators. My conclusion is, reach 1, teach 10. Each of you are informed. Each of you make a difference. Go out and do your thing. Be passionate about what you're doing. Teach your friends, your families, your healthcare workers. I don't care who you talk to. Talk about it. No one has died from cannabis. Get involved with NORML. Contact your representatives and please tell your story. And my last comment, cannabis is not an entrance drug, it's an exit drug from pharmaceuticals and narcotics.